And now for our final Catalyzing Change panel, please welcome to guide that discussion a senior correspondent at Time, Justin Worland.
Okay, well, good morning, I guess. It's still morning. My name is Justin Worland, and I guess I don't really need an introduction because my whole bio is up there, but I'm a senior correspondent at Time where I write about climate change really in all facets. I'm really thrilled to be back here at Global Futures leading this discussion on catalyzing change, communication for action. It was really fun last year to see the development of the must-have framework. This session doesn't exactly fit into that framework. Last year it emerged that communication is something that cuts across all of the different must-haves, and so we're going to dig into how you communicate on climate and how the folks here, we have four great people to discuss their own approaches and views on that. I'm just going to start with some of my own reflections as a climate journalist, as someone who communicates about climate change for a living in my own way. I started on the climate beat about a decade ago, basically by chance. I was writing about other things. This job opened up. I figured I would try it and then move on to something else when a better opportunity came along. I think, as to many, particularly at the time, to me, climate felt a little distant in time, also distant in terms of, what it means for our daily lives. And so I wrote, some sort of first stories about the science. I wrote about the policies. But the more I got into it, the more I started to realize, actually, this is a much more expansive beat. There's a much richer way to tell the story. Understanding the science remains important, but climate is connected to so many things in ways that reporters often didn't tell. So I began to look for stories, to tell stories that way, grounded in the literature, but spinning out to connect with people the ways that they care about and ways they care about. And what I learned is that, contrary to the sort of knee-jerk reaction at the time, and even to some degree today, there actually are readers out there, maybe not typical climate readers, but readers out there who are interested in climate stories if you can find a way to connect it to them. And so I have a few examples. One, I wrote a story about how climate change was subtly shifting local politics in San Diego. This is a place where there's a multi-billion-dollar rethinking of the transportation system that had led to a sort of political backlash in the community, all sorts of effects of climate change at the same time, but nobody was really talking about it that way in the community. And so I wrote this story looking at that and received, it's very well read, and also received a flurry of emails from people in the community fascinated by this angle into climate change, and that, sort of surprised that nobody had told it that way. Another example would be a story about what must be the wonkiest sounding thing, a border carbon adjustment mechanism, which is a policy that is being implemented in the EU starting next month. But in 2019, I wrote about the first stages of that policy discussion, and despite some skepticism from my editors, but framed it around, unfortunately, Donald Trump, because that's a thing that people wanted to read. So I wrote about how Donald Trump had created the opening for this new kind of policy in the midst of fragmentation of politics. It was the second most read climate story of that year, which is really striking to think about such a wonky policy being the leading to that kind of readership. And then the final thing I'll just share is in April at Time we launched a column/newsletter about the intersection of the private sector and climate. But unlike a lot of professional products or what the Wall Street Journal might do, we focused on sort of making it very accessible. We're trying to reach professionals who are maybe interested, they know they should know something about it, but they can't just dive deep into the wonkiness of a lot of other reporting. And I have to say, amazing success. We have 400,000 subscribers, which is a really remarkable number in a very short amount of time. And I think what it speaks to is if you look for the ways in which people, the niches, the areas in which people are thinking and aren't being engaged, there's a lot of opportunity to communicate and connect with people, but that work just isn't happening. I want to close with, I think, what might be the question I get most often on panels when I speak in this vein. People will say, well, it sounds like you're speaking to people who already know there's a problem, even if they're not active on it, how do you communicate with the people who deny there's a problem? And I think my answer often disappoints. I say, I don't. I don't really. I mean, that's not my goal. There's the sort of tried and true thinking for a lot of activists who take civil disobedience actions that just a small percentage of people, activating a small percentage of people, can catalyze change. And so I try to take that into heart. I think if I can engage a small group of people reading this newsletter in the private sector to go back to their workplace and think differently about some of the issues that they're talking about in the meeting rooms, that's actually quite significant. If I can get a small group of people to think about the ways in which climate is shaping the local policies in San Diego, that's a big accomplishment, and those kinds of changes can be significant. So that would be my word of encouragement. Think about how to meet people where they are. Think about looking beyond just trying to convert the unconverted to really engaging people, accessing different ways to think about this issue. We're going to hear from people who are wiser than I am, and we'll start with Frank Niepold.
Wherever I want. All right. I'll stand over here. I've been sitting a lot recently. So I'm actually going to be brief here. And so I've been with you, I guess, should I introduce myself? Yes. Yeah, I probably should introduce myself. So Frank Niepold, I work at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I've been there 18 years. I also coordinate about 30 federal agencies of the U.S. government on capacity building and engagement for the U.S. government under the U.S. Global Change Research Program. I represent the U.S. To the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for the Action for Climate Empowerment, or Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, reporting mechanisms, and more. Just the way it is. In the federal government in the United States, you get a lot of titles because there are not a lot of people. So there's a lot of work. But that's just the short of it. One of the things that we've been doing is trying to figure out how, this is catalyzing change, about how to communicate. I use a lot more modes than when you hear the word communicate. Often you think of media, you think of books, you think of websites, the news journals, Time magazine, newsletters. There's a lot of other powerful tools. So for us, we're looking at a full force effort. There are many, many, many modes of building learning and understanding, skill, ability, knowledge. And so we're trying to weave all of them together into a coherent effort, both with the federal government, but then also beyond. So we have every form of education, communication, capacity building, technical assistance, workforce development, data access, information access. You could imagine we're trying to marshal it, but one of the things I've heard in this conference over and over and over again is we know. I hate to break it to you, we don't know. Some of us know. It is knowable. That's the good news. But the we is not where we in this room maybe, but when we go down on the street, right there, we don't. Tony, I'm not going to take Tony's thunder because he's he's a great partner and friend, and their work on characterizing who knows, what do they know, what motivates them, that's Tony's work. My work is how do we define what they should know and then catalyze the effort to actually make that true. So many wonderful, important things have been said here about the power of these capabilities. But when, I come from the education sector mostly. It is one of the most powerful ways you can actually increase knowledge of people. And there's a form of education called transformational learning theory. It's a really simple idea. It says you come to know something, and as a result of that, your life course utterly changes. All of us have probably had transformational learning experiences where you finally understood something, and as a result, everything you do after that continues to build deeper understanding around it, and also it redirects your course of life. Education has the power to do that. An article that somebody reads and it hits an idea just the right way, and next thing you know, the rest of their life changes. For me, that's catalytic. You're going in a direction, you come to know, and then everything after that changes. Climate has the requirement of catalytic transformational change. It is totally doable. The challenge we face is we are not doing it enough. If you go into any classroom, whether it's a university or a K-12 primary or secondary in the United States, chances of getting anything related to this, what we're talking about, this room, is close to zero. Some great work is going on. Some amazing work is going on. But we need to increase the opportunity. Because one of the principles we work in education is education for all. Education for all. So the we know actually becomes true. And we have a lot of work to do to actually close that gap. I'm not going to take what Tony's going to talk about, but I think that one of the things we're doing right now in the government is defining what should we know about climate. I've been spending a lot of time in and out of this room negotiating how I get that done. I mean, we're in active, heavy negotiation on finalizing that. It will be very helpful for you all when it's done to actually, what should you know? And it's changed. What we said in 2009 and what we say now are not the same things. Things have changed in the climate field. And I'll tell you one thing when we did the listening sessions across the United States and actually internationally, it opened up. Solutions. Young people want to shift from problem to solution in a massive way. The more if we describe the problem deeper and deeper and deeper, it is not working. I think we've heard that here, but I'll just add the naming of that. So I would just challenge us all to get specific, work in collaboration, and actually make the we know more true than it is today. If we are able to do that, I think a lot of what we are trying to achieve in this conference and the wider work will actually be improved. So I don't know if I'm on mark, off mark on time, but hopefully that's good enough to get us started. I'm all right? All right, cool, thank you.
Thanks, Frank. I love the, I don't love that we don't know, but we don't know, and getting people to know is a great way to put this. Colin Butfield is next.
Thanks, Justin. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks very much. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we catalyze change through storytelling and communications. And my day job is all about making documentaries, big broadcast pieces that potentially reach a lot of people and can sometimes be very good at sparking a conversation. But you need to go a lot further if you want to actually start to lead to change. And it always feels a bit weird when you're at something like Climate Week, UNGA, and you're talking about storytelling, because it feels a little bit like, is that a bit small compared to the really big things like politics, business, or science? But actually, storytelling is exactly how, since the very first human settlements, we began to understand our place in the world, give meaning to it, give context to it. As those civilizations grew and developed, it was those stories that began to form culture, determined what was important to us as a collective and as societies. And those are the things that ended up driving business, politics, the scientific endeavors we pursued. So I'd argue, if you want to change the way that the world perceives climate change, the way we get towards the 10 must-haves, the way we value nature, how we respect each other, how we value humanity, then you have to change the story. But more importantly, perhaps, is you have to change the way the story is being told and who's telling it. For too long, most of the stories about these kind of areas are told by the same people in similar ways to similar audiences over and over again. And we wonder why things don't change as fast as we know that they must do. And one of the challenges when I had the pleasure of being here last year and we were talking about the 10 must-haves was to be really honest at looking at what are the things that are stopping those happening. What are the enabling conditions, or flip the other way around, what are the enabling conditions we need to enable them to happen? So I started looking at what one of the things around storytelling is and particularly telling visual or scientific-based stories, is sometimes there's an inequity in access to the materials to do it. Not the ability to tell stories, we all have the ability to tell stories, and not audience, because audience shouldn't be measured in scale. It should be measured by whomever you're speaking to, you're communicating to, in what ways. But sometimes the materials are really, it's really inequitable, the access to them. So to take my particular area of work, we film the changes that are happening across the world, both the human and the natural world. Those images are usually paid for by a major broadcaster, which we're very grateful for, but it means we don't own them, which is fine in our day-to-day lives, but it means if somebody wants to use them for education or for activism or for community engagement, it's not we can't give it to them. Those images are usually sold for thousands and thousands of pounds on image libraries, way out of the reach of anything other than the biggest organizations. Similarly, we're challenged by a second thing, which is knowing that what you're seeing, if you happen to get free stuff on the internet, is that scientifically valid? Does that represent it? Are you authentically portraying the people that are featured in it? Do you understand the context those images are being used? And a lot of those things stop people from taking those and developing campaigns, education materials, all the other myriad of things we know we're going to need. And then the third factor that I think is a real big challenge to achieving this is that many of these things are never filmed or recorded in the first place. I mean, one of the biggest environmental stories of a couple of years ago, the Amazon fires. Nobody filmed that to the scale and quality that actually brought the human dimension to that, the bigger picture challenges, what it meant for indigenous groups, what the backbone of the agricultural changes that were happening and the political changes that were happening around that area at the time, much less the sort of scale and damage that was going on. So if nobody filmed that and it's not available, how do you expect the story to decentralize and change? So working with a number of scientists, cinematographers around the world, just huge number of people in multiple different countries, we tried to create a non-profit initiative that would do that. And we're sort of giving it its beta launch this week. We trialed it in India with a load of Indian filmmakers, cinematographers, storytellers, and scientists. So we've got a nice big screen and a good sound system, so we thought we'd show you a quick sort of 60-second look at Open Planet. Thank you. I'm almost out of time. I just wanted to share one more thing about that. So Open Planet has it's had its beta phase. Every shot you saw on there is already on there. There's about 4,000 different clips. Every one of them, we've worked with the filmmakers, verified them, got the open source license to ensure anybody using it for non-profit use can use it for free. Over the next few months before its public launch, we'll be adding the data visualizations and growing it exponentially over the next decade. The key thing underlying it is that this is a human story that needs to change, and human stories can't be one to many. They have to be all of us shaping our own human story. I'm a white middle-aged guy from the UK. The human story is not mine to tell. The human story is everybody's to tell, and the idea here is that anybody in any language to any audience in any way can have the tools to tell the stories that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, next we have Brian MacCraith.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you today. It's been a wonderful 3 days, all about actions, and I'm delighted too to be able to announce today a new action from Arizona State University that we're announcing publicly for the first time. So let me jump straight into this. Over the past few days, I don't think anyone could be left in any doubt that we're all facing an existential planetary crisis, whether it's the transgression of 6 of the planetary boundaries, whether it's the state of the Earth's tipping elements. We all know that the Earth is moving into an unsafe space for all of us, and what is needed urgently are interventions and transformations that can be scaled globally and at speed. And the concept we're presenting today is the notion that universities can and indeed must become the global catalysts for that societal transformation and societal mobilization. So let me give you a bit more detail on that. So why do we say universities can do this and must do this? I think the key thing is that universities, with all their assets, are uniquely positioned, number one, to inspire and empower the next generation of leaders and change makers, to create knowledge and to translate that knowledge into real action that can tackle the major challenges facing us. And thirdly, to influence governments and broader society by thought leadership and indeed by example. And those 3 words of inspire, innovate, and influence are central to what we're talking about. Uniquely too, universities can unite governments, society, and industry to create the unique quadruple helix that's necessary for effective innovation. And finally, as anchor institutions in their communities, they can engage very, very effectively with society around them. So in order to make this happen on the global scale, what we've been doing at the University Design Institute at ASU is to create this concept of university design clinics for planetary health. The function of these clinics is to assist universities and indeed clusters of universities and importantly higher education systems in countries to transform themselves so that they can effectively make a very significant impact on planetary health by focusing on it across all dimensions of activities of the university. In this work, we will base it on international best practice because we're establishing what we call the Global University Sustainability Observatory, all the time tracking best ideas internationally across all the dimensions I'll talk about in a second. And we've heard many of those very good ideas, for example, from Malaysia this morning. And these clinics will be offered globally. There'll be a particular focus on the global south and working in Africa and Southeast Asia in particular, but they'll be offered globally and will lead to a network of universities worldwide advancing these innovations at speed. So let me give you a bit more detail then. In our work over the past year, we've identified 7 core pillars of activity in universities, which provide a useful framework for a whole of university approach that will enable this mission-driven approach to planetary health for universities. There are 7 there. I won't go through them all. I won't have time to do so, but let me take a few of these. The curriculum and the teaching and learning is probably most important of all in terms of creating those future leaders. This is about infusing the curriculum with sustainability principles, the planetary boundaries framework, green skills, and relevant indigenous knowledge and wisdom. Reform of curriculum is about fostering the sort of talent that the world needs now and over the coming decisive decade that we heard about. It's about creating planetisms, about planetary entrepreneurs, planetary health entrepreneurs, informed and responsible global citizens. Research and innovation is about creating and translating the knowledge that we need now to tackle the challenges. So it's about straddling the social sciences and humanities right across to the STEM areas. It's about evidence, it's about looking at behavioral science in terms of mobilizing society. It's about carbon capture. It's about sustainable aviation fuel. It's about universities aligning their research strategies with the challenges facing the world. In terms of thought leadership, it's about engaging effectively with governments, regional, national, globally, to provide and support evidence-based policymaking as well as influencing societal behavior. In terms of empowering students, as we've seen nearly every day this week, we need to amplify youth voices. We need to harness their wealth of ideas and to enable them translate their energy and motivations into action. And this is beyond just the learning process. This is working closely with students to enable that to happen. In terms of sustainable operations, many universities that are the size of small or mid-sized towns, they need to be exemplary organizations in their region, providing best practice example across all they do. So there are other examples there, but I'll move on to the next slide. Who's going to deliver all this? The University Design Institute at ASU was established more than 5 years ago to enable universities to transform themselves across many areas, but a particular focus, for example, on digital transformation. These new clinics will obviously focus on planetary health. But we've been working mainly in Africa and Southeast Asia. We've worked with over 100 universities already in 23 different countries. But our ambition for this and our vision for this is much, much bigger across the globe. We want to mobilize thousands of universities. Sorry, just one last point on that. It won't be just the University Design Clinic or University Design Institute working on its own. We will work and leverage all the strengths at ASU, the Global Futures Laboratory that's behind this wonderful event, the College of Global Futures as well. So all of the content will be coming from experts right across all the relevant domains, and I think it's important to state that. If you want to learn a bit more about this, you can capture that QR code there. But basically, the vision is thousands of universities worldwide motivating themselves to tackle planetary health in this coordinated fashion. To give you the figures, there's over 30,000 post-secondary institutions worldwide. And at any given time, there's more than 250 million students across those institutions. Imagine indeed mobilizing even a fraction of those motivated by the issues of planetary health and informed in a manner that they can tackle the issues that need to be tackled. So this is my final slide. So in summary, we have created a model which will allow us to mobilize and unleash the unique power of universities across talent, knowledge creation, and influence. Many countries across the world are now building this into policy. For example, the French government has directed to their public universities to tackle issues like this, to infuse sustainability into their curricula. India has just announced it in recent months as well. I think we'll see more of this, and this will be directly aligned with this. We will work with strategic partners. We've been working, for example, with the Learning Planners Institute in Paris over the past year, in productive discussions with them. But we'll work with foundations to enable us to accelerate this to the level that's required to have the impact that's required. Final point, Mary Robinson has been mentioned. You can hear I'm Irish. The former president of Ireland, she's been mentioned a few times this week. We were delighted to have her here yesterday. I heard her speak just about 11 months ago at the inaugural Global Sustainable Development Congress for Universities in Glasgow. And she was very frustrated at universities, and she called for action. She said, universities need to step up more. You need to develop a moonshot mentality to tackle this major issue. Well, this is our initial response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Finally, we have Tony Leiserowitz.
Good morning, almost good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again to the organizers for organizing this wonderful event. It's been a very jam-packed few days, and building on what we did last year. I would like to start with a provocation, and that is that I don't think we are lacking a supply of solutions. I think this conference, many of the conversations around this city this week and around the world have demonstrated we have lots of great ideas. We have great policies, we have new business models, we have new products, new services, we have lots and lots of solutions. But what we lack is sufficient public and political will for climate action, as in demand for the actions. And so I want to touch on this because I think these are the enabling conditions for the must-haves. We need speed and scale, and my analogy here is the climate system itself. We know that as we warm the planet, we get more frequent and more intense and ever more rapid extreme weather events. Now I want to use that analogy in the social change space because I think when we change the underlying social, cultural, and political climate of climate change, we will get positive change more frequently. Those changes will go farther, they will be more durable, and they will come more rapidly. So this is not just we need to do education because it's a good moral thing to do. I think this is actually the enabling conditions for the solutions we seek. So one of our famous presidents, Abraham Lincoln, very nicely put it, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. So we do studies globally around the world and many here in the United States. I'm just going to share a few key insights about where we are, or at least what the data tells us where we are right now. These are very broad brush statements because I'm going to talk about data from 192 countries and territories around the world from a study we just did last year in partnership with Metadata for Good. And what you're seeing here is a map of the world and just asking the question of how much do you know about climate change? So the countries that are darker red is where public awareness of this issue is very, very high, often over 90%. But the darker blue are countries where there's actually a majority of the public that basically tells us they know little to often nothing about climate change. And this point was made earlier. We are all inside a green bubble, inside a green bubble, inside a green bubble, inside a green bubble. Like we are not representative of the world as a whole. There are still, we estimate, 4 out of 10 adults on Earth, roughly 2 billion people who basically know little to nothing about climate change in 2023. That, however, does not mean that they're not keenly aware of changes in their own climates. And in fact, our data tells us they are. They know temperatures are changing. They know precipitation patterns are changing. They know that growing seasons are shifting. But they lack the concept of climate change to understand why these things are happening. And even more importantly, they lack the concept of climate change to inform their future decisions. And these are societies making enormous bets about the future, enormous decisions, building entire new cities that are going to house tens of millions of people, deciding what crops are going to grow. And I've been participating in internally displacement conversations with the UN this week, people deciding when they have to move, okay? And if you don't have this concept of climate change in mind, then many of us will make bad decisions, bad choices, because we often as human beings tend to assume that the future climate conditions will look like the past. But if there's one thing we know about climate change is that the future will absolutely not look like the past. So it's just to say that yes, we would all like to talk about border adjustment taxes. Well, maybe not everybody. But anyway, that's the kind of policy discussion we would love to have, but there are still many of the world's most vulnerable people who've contributed the least to this problem, who are getting hit first and worst, who yet still don't really understand what this issue is even about. However, when we just give them a one-sentence description of what climate change is and how it connects to their own local conditions, we find that immediately over 8 out of 10 people worldwide say, yes, that's happening. And moreover, they say, and yes, I'm really worried about it. And then when we ask, how big of a risk is this to you, we see the inverse pattern. Suddenly now it's the people in the developing world and the global south that say, I'm not just worried about this for the future, my kids, or for other people or other species. I think this is a personal threat. But by contrast, it's now the richer countries, the wealthier countries, the developed countries where people are still not so sure. Many of them still think it's distant. Distant in time, maybe it's something for my grandkids. Distant in space. This is about polar bears or developing countries, but not my country, not my community, not my friends, family, or me. And as a result, it's still psychologically distant, and they don't understand why this is a crucial and urgent issue. So it's to say that while we still need to build basic awareness, especially in the developing world, we also still need to raise public understandings of the threat, of the risks, of the dangers in especially the developed world. And what we see pretty much everywhere is that many people do not yet understand why this is happening, that it's us, it's human caused. It's primarily the burning of fossil fuels and, of course, some land use change as well. And that's important because if you think it's just natural, then many people just presume it's warmer and then it gets colder, and it gets wetter and then it gets drier. And they don't understand that we need to actually reduce the fundamental sources of this, in particularly the burning of fossil fuels. However, we also see that once people even have just a little bit of understanding about it, there's overwhelming support for their own government taking more action about this. So it's just to say, I think the elements are here, okay? Like somebody raised denial, that is, climate denial, organized climate denial is limited to basically just 4 countries, okay? This is not a problem in most of the rest of the world. This is an American problem, a Canadian problem, an Australian problem, and well, now it's a UK problem again because of the Prime Minister's recent announcements. But that's it. You don't find organized climate denial in the vast majority of the world. So I think we actually have the elements we need. They just need to be released, unlocked. And we've already won the argument about more clean energy. Everywhere in the world, including, I would like to point out, Saudi Arabia, majorities of people say we want our country to use more clean, renewable energy in the future. That's an enormous accomplishment. We've won that narrative battle. However, we see it's not quite so simple when it comes to understanding that we need to stop burning fossil fuels. And in particular, the developing world, there are many people who don't understand that. One, because of, let's be clear, energy access, energy security. If you're one of the hundreds of millions of people who don't have energy, you just want energy. But secondly, they don't know that it's the burning of fossil fuels that's causing the problem. Okay? So we don't yet have the social conditions, the political conditions, where countries, where in fact 75% of the emissions of the future are going to come from, those political conditions are not in place to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies or to more aggressively stop the drilling and the mining and so on for these fuel sources. And then perhaps most importantly, most of us rarely ever hear about it. And this is the education, this is the communication problem in a nutshell, is that very, very few of us ever hear about this. And if we're not talking about it, then how important can it be? Because we talk about the issues that are most important to us. So just to conclude, we still think that there's about 2 billion adults worldwide who know little to nothing about this issue. They are often the most vulnerable, but it doesn't take much to convince them that this is a really serious problem. So we need to do basic awareness building still, okay? But we also need to increase public perceptions of the threat and demand, coming back to that critical word, demand for solutions in the rest of the world. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tony. Well, that was a great set of speakers. I had thought we were going to have some conversation, but I was told, and I think wisely, that lunch is next, so we're going to skip the conversation. But thank you again to all of our speakers. Very insightful.